Hi, Kirsten. Welcome to the podcast. We are so excited to hear about your vocabulary routine that you do with your students. We cannot wait.
Yeah,
Thank you so
welcome.
much for having me.
We are so excited because we know how important instructional routines are in the classroom. And when a teacher has an incredible routine, we just want them to share immediately. So we know you have a vocabulary routine, and we'd love for you to walk us through it step by step. What does it look like in action, and how do students engage with the whole process?
Absolutely. So I use this strategy during my whole group lessons specifically. I was a first grade teacher for 6 years. Now I'm a reading specialist, but I still use this in my small groups. We would focus on in our unit about 5 texts in our close reading unit. We would dive really deep into them, and then students would show their understanding and mastery of the content through written exit tickets, discussions, and projects. So what I would do then is backwards map from the unit and then find that vocabulary strategy and what words to teach. I would take a look at the writing prompt or discussion or project that I wanted students to do at the end of the read. Then I would decide what vocabulary words are important for them to know in order to be successful with the content. That backwards mapping strategy is really helpful with picking the words, and it helped me really ground my lessons. So first, what I would do is then sort my vocabulary words into tiers. First, I would think of tier 1 words. So essentially, those are everyday words most students know, they use them often. I don't really need to teach them, but I do identify them because they're important. And the only time I would teach a tier 1 word is if I have a multilingual learner that doesn't really know the language yet, then I would make some time to teach that word to students. Then I would think of tier 3 words, and those are really, really content specific. They need to be taught, but just briefly with some visuals. Students don't really need to own these words, but they are important to go over before the lesson. And I quickly review them, teach them within a few minutes, and then when they come up in the text, then I'll point them out and I'll talk to them with students. Then the bulk of the words, so for this strategy, are those tier 2 words. These really guided my instruction for these lessons. I would pick just one word, just one, and that word is the word I want them to own. What word do they need to be successful with in order to do the activity, to do the exit ticket, to complete the discussion? This word can be applied to other texts in the unit. It can be even applied to other content areas throughout the day. And then I use an explicit vocabulary routine to teach them this word on the day 1 of the lesson, because we read the book usually for about 3 to 4 days. And the goal really I keep in mind when finding this word is what word would help my students get a higher order understanding of the text or concept, and then be able to then use that word in other activities. So once I pick the word, I use an explicit vocabulary routine in a Frayer model. So I'll kind of walk you guys through like what those look like. A Frayer model is what students actually see. So when I'm teaching on my smartboard, it's essentially a 4-square. And the vocabulary word is right in the middle. And then the top left square gives a student-friendly definition of the word. The top right gives the word in a sentence. And I try to keep the sentence related to the content that they're learning. The bottom left of the square are visuals of examples. So within the content, but also like other areas and other meanings. And then the right square are non-examples, which are pretty cool. So what are some things that do not mean this word? Some are kind of obvious, but some also are a little tricky for kids. So now I'll kind of walk you guys through what each step of the routine is. It's pretty cool because the routine takes about 5 minutes. I love it because when I show my teachers this, I say it doesn't take long. It's actually a 5-minute routine, and it's pretty engaging for kids to follow along. So first I say the word, I have students repeat me. Then I say, let's pronounce the sounds. Let's think of the phonemes and let's say all the sounds in the word. The kids say it with me. Then I show them. I say, this is what the word looks like. We discuss the spelling. We discuss the syllables, the morphemes or meaningful word parts within the word, and even parts of speech. And this is all on that 4-square, on that Frayer model, so they're seeing it. Then I read to them, okay, this is a definition of the word. I read it to them, the students repeat me. And I'm really intentional about the definition to make sure I know my students and what they can grasp, and I make that definition cater to them. Then I read it in a sentence, and they repeat me. It's related to that content. Then I just talk more about the word. I give lots of examples. This is what this word means here. Here's another example of this word. Then we play a fun game and I say, I want you to think of this word. I'm going to say something. If you think that's an example of blank, give a thumb up. If you think it's not an example, give a thumb down. And what I love about this game is kids get really into it because they start to really think, okay, I want to win this game. I want to beat the teacher. And sometimes they get really enthusiastic and they're like, yes, that's the word. And sometimes they're like, no, that's crazy. That's not the word. And after we play that for a few examples, then I end with a turn and talk because it's so important for kids then to take that vocabulary word and then apply it. I do turn and talk partners in advance to make sure language levels are appropriate so that I don't pair a student that doesn't talk much with another student that doesn't talk much. I try to just be really intentional. And students will either use that word in a sentence or give another example of the word, or sometimes even give non-examples, which is pretty fun. Then I have them share out, and then I sometimes do an extension where we have a vocabulary journal and they write the word in their journal with the example and a visual. One key point that I always ground this in is I say the vocabulary word probably 15 to 20 times. I'm constantly saying it in the routine. Kids are repeating it. And by the end, they really should know at least how to say the word because they hear me say it so many times. And then after the lesson, essentially, then we read our text. And I say, while we're reading, I want you to listen for this word. If you hear it, I want you to give your I agree. And then I pause and then we discuss it. And then in future texts, we make sure I review it again. We talk about it again. And then the goal is then by that writing prompt or by that final discussion, they're using that word and they're owning that word.
Such a great routine. Kirsten, I'm thinking about that thumbs up, thumbs down that you mentioned in the routine. Is that a helpful formative assessment for you in the moment? First,
Absolutely.
To see which students grasp it. And then do you just like make note of that? Like what happens in your brain, in your teacher brain from there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I'm watching, if I see a student that maybe thought something was an example and it's not, then in the moment I actually correct it. And I say, oh, I see what you were thinking there, but let me tell you why. And then I'll explain it. So I think about it as this is a really good teaching moment. And that little informal assessment then allows me to stop, re-explain it, and then make sure I clear that up for them.
Yeah, I love that in the moment because then they don't march forward into the text with that incorrect idea that you're just, and it's also, it feels like very normalized for students to feel okay, feel safe, putting the wrong thumb up and then being like, oh, that was silly, I should be this. Okay, thanks, I also have one more question that goes back to something that you said in the very beginning. And I'm thinking about, my teacher self having to only select one tier 2 word. How do you select just one?
That's a great question. It's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a text where it's pretty easy, but some I've worked with my team and we're like, what word are we picking? This is hard. These are all so important. What I try to think about when I do this is what word is going to come up in the other text following it. So for example, we did an animal adaptations unit and the word that we did was protect. And we decided to choose that in one of our texts because we realized looking at all these other texts, all the other animals protect themselves. We're going to see this come up again. And that was our rationale for thinking it. If it doesn't come up in another text, then I think what's a word that really is like almost like the main idea of the text? And that kind of helps me pick it. And even if it's not used in the next text, it could be used in another unit or even like another subject throughout the day.
I'm curious to follow up on that. How often do you do this routine? And when you said it was 5 minutes, I was like, well, you could do that every day. But I'm wondering if you do, is this one where you pick a different word each day or by the week? How often do you do this routine?
I try to pick one word per text. So we use a model where we read a text in our whole group for about 3 to 4 days. So essentially, it's kind of like one word a week, I would say, because I don't want to overload them with too many tier 2, because then I'll find they're not really owning them. But if I do one word per week or 2 at most, then I do see more at-bats with that word and more exposure to it, more practice, and then they're owning it more easily.
Yeah, and so you're reading that text for that 3 or 4 days, so you're seeing it each day. It's not like you do the routine and then they don't see that word for 3 or 4 days, right? They see it.
Exactly. Yeah, they see it, they talk about it. Absolutely.
That's great. So I want to go back. I know our listeners probably they're like, I heard that routine. I want to rewind it and hear it again, but we're actually going to let them hear it again. with an example. Can you tell us, like, what would be a tier 2 word? You might have already, did you already say it?
Yeah.
So you've already said the tier 2 word. So let's go ahead with that tier 2 word, protect. How would you walk through that same routine with that word?
Absolutely. So first I would tell my students, we're going to learn a new word today. We're going to own a word for our new text. And our text is all about frogs, right? And I'll say, this is my word, protect. Everyone repeat me. And everyone repeats protect. Let's say the sounds in protect. Ready? Protect. What's my word? They're like, protect. Great. Let me show you what it looks like. And then I show them the word protect on the board. Then I say, okay, what do you notice about this word? What are some spelling patterns you see? Kids might say, oh, I see 2 consonants at the beginning, that pr with the PR. I see, oh, there's 2 syllables in that word. Or they might say, there's a tricky sound at the end, the kt, kt. And then we'll practice. Yeah, we saw that in our small group, right? Absolutely. Then I say, let me tell you what this means, right? Protect means to keep something safe from harm. What does it mean? To keep something safe from harm. And then they repeat me. Great. Let me tell you this word in a sentence because we're going to use this today. Then I come up with a sentence from the text that I think would really help them understand. And this one actually was about turtles instead of frogs. And I said, the turtle uses a shell to protect itself. And then they repeat me. Say, great. There's lots of other examples of protect that doesn't have to just do with turtles. So I'll say, I use a helmet to protect myself when I ride my bike. I sometimes like to go roller skating and it's super dangerous. So I wear knee pads to protect myself. What does it do? Protect. Great. My co-teacher has glasses and she has a case to protect it so that when it goes in her bag, it doesn't fall and crack. It protects the glasses. I also know it's been pretty rainy lately and I have an umbrella and that umbrella protects me from the rain hitting my head. What does it do? Protect. Excellent. Then I might say, does anyone know any other examples? And then I hear from some of the kids and then they might share some others that I didn't think of, which is great. Then I say, okay, now we're going to play a game. I want to see if you know what it means to protect. I'm going to say something. And if you think it's protecting something or it's an example of protect, give a thumb up. If you think it is not protecting, it's not providing protection, you're going to give a thumb down. Okay. So then I show the visuals on the model. So the first picture might be a seatbelt, right? And they're seeing it, but I'm not like pointing it out. I'm just kind of talking about it. I'll say, I went in the car yesterday and I put on my seatbelt. Am I protecting myself? Yes, protect, good. And then I might ask why, like, why is that protecting? Then I'll say something like, I was rushing to work and I left my phone case on my dresser. Is my iPhone protected? No. Okay, someone share why. Oh, because if you drop it, the glass is going to break, right? I saw the weirdest thing. I saw a turtle that didn't have a shell. Is that turtle protected from a predator? No, right? So then I go over like a bunch of those. I kind of alternate yes and no. I sometimes do maybe like 5 to 6 examples. Then I say, okay, everybody, so we're going to use the word protect with our Turn and Talk partners. Turn to your partner and share a sentence with the word protect, give an example. And if you finish early, maybe give some non-examples. So then I have them turn. I listen in on their conversations. I'm going around. I'm correcting any misconceptions if I'm noticing like maybe someone didn't understand it. Then after a few minutes, we turn back and I say, okay, can someone share what their partner said? And they share what their partner said. Oh, my partner had a really good sentence about protection. And then at the end, I say, great. Now we're going to read a story or a text about turtles. And while we're reading, we're learning about how a turtle protects itself. And there's more ways than just the shell. There's a lot of different ways we'll learn. While we read today, if you hear the word protect, or if you hear something that shows that protection, you're going to give an I agree, and then we'll discuss it after the read. And that's kind of it. That's kind of how I go through it on that day one.
I love that they're looking for not even just the actual word, but the meaning of the word. Even if the word's not said, they're looking for that, the idea of protection, even if that, because it's easy to pick out the word itself, but, thinking of the idea of protection along the way. I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also like that you're cueing from both the text that they're going to encounter and future texts, but also life, like making those connections for them. I also like that you gave that example of the umbrella because to me, that's kind of like a tricky one, right? Like, is an umbrella, like, what do you mean an umbrella is protecting? Okay, it's not like a shell. It's not like protecting from a predator. It's protecting from the rain. So it's kind of bridging their, or maybe not bridging, extending their idea of protection in a way that they might not have thought. And also giving them that concrete real life example to connect it to, which we know they need all those spider webs of connections in order to really own this word, right? So I'm kind of thinking about that idea, right, of students owning the word. How do students demonstrate or show you that they've grasped the meaning of the word?
Yeah, great question. So some ways they show me that they grasp it is through their writing. So we do maybe an informative writing exit ticket or maybe a shared writing activity. If I notice them using that word in their writing, that's like a huge win. I'm like, great, they got it. And that's one way. If we do a discourse activity where I'm having students do a discussion, maybe it's a gallery walk, maybe it's like a hot seat strategy where there's someone in the hot seat and they're asking questions. If they're using the word protect verbally, that's also a win, which is great. But last, if I have a student that's maybe not able to use protect, maybe their language isn't there yet. If they're using words that are similar, like safe, or giving a detail that does mean protect, we're almost there. And then I'll ask them, I'll say, great, what does that mean? Like if they're staying safe. And if they might not know it, I'll show them again. But there's definitely different levels of understanding for that. We have a lot of anchor charts in our classroom, so we'll have vocabulary words up there. And even if I have a student that doesn't remember how to spell it or forgets, if they're looking for that word and they could tell me they're looking for protect, that's also a win because they're using their resources to find the word.
Speaking of like those anchor charts, I'm wondering, you mentioned a few things already, but I just let's repeat them, even if that's okay if you repeat them. What happens after you're done reading all these books about protection and you're not really talking about the word protect anymore, but we don't want to lose that word, right? So what kinds of things do you do to kind of keep that word alive in your classroom after this unit is over?
Yeah, great question. So some things I'll do in my small group lessons, I'll find some text that would reintroduce that word. So maybe it's a decodable text and maybe students are working on phonemes like sh, like in frog. And it's just a story about a frog, but maybe the frog is protecting itself and the word protect isn't in there. I'll find a way to kind of bring that back. Like, remember we learned a couple units ago about protection? Like, how does the frog protect itself here? So I'll try to be really intentional about connecting the whole group content building curriculum and the small group. Sometimes it's a little hard to do that, but sometimes you can find a text where you can connect it. So that's one way. We do have a writing center where students do informative writing, narrative writing, opinion writing. I sometimes will make a prompt that relates back to that word. So maybe it's another animal. And I say, hey, we learned a lot about animal adaptations last unit. I want you to write a story or an informative writing piece that shows how another animal protects itself. So I try to do that as well in small group and in their centers time.
I love those activities because they're just extending what they've already learned about this word. And you're actually making me think, Kirsten, about in our book, we shared this vocabulary strategy called Shades of Meaning, and it's one of my favorites. And so I just kind of like did it real fast for this word, thinking like, because you made me think of it, I was like, I'm just going to do it real fast. So if we think about the word protect, if you think about a paint swatch, students kind of like organizing their understanding of the word protect, right? Like other words, because you said students may encounter other words, but not the actual word protect. So we could think about the words safe, shield, shelter, guard, defend, and protect, and just have students kind of like organize those or think about them as alternative synonyms to protect and just extending their knowledge there. I thought when you said like that they might not get the word protect, but they might have other words, like it's just so helpful to keep those other words in mind and like what shades of meaning they convey and have students think about those other ones too. So thanks for making me think of that.
Yeah, that's a great strategy. And I even thought of something else too as you were talking. I even tried to incorporate it into my language, just talking to them. So if they were putting their stuff away in their cubbies and I noticed like some students like drop their books, I'll say, please protect your materials. I tried to really connect it to just like my informal language. and use some of that academic language in there as well.
So smart.
Yeah. I was thinking, Lori, as you were talking too, like those words probably are going to come up in texts, along throughout the whole year. And you could keep bringing it back to protect, if they see the word guarded or guarding, right? Then that's like protect, we've done that word. You can keep bringing it back, which is really lovely.
Yeah. All right. So we've talked a whole lot about Tier 2 words today. Kirsten, I'm wondering if you have anything that you'd like to share about Tier 1 or Tier 3 words. Like, how do you address those words in class?
Absolutely. So Tier 1, I just address it if I have maybe a newcomer, a student that's learning the language. I just talk about those words as if they would already know them. I don't give a lot of front loading. But the Tier 3 are fun. What I do is I pick those out. Like, for example, the word camouflage is a word that would be Tier 3 because they need to know it for the text, but it's not something they need to own. They're not going to see it come up a lot in the other texts. What I would do for that is we use Canva, which is really cool. It's a little more student friendly than PowerPoint. And what I would do is put the Tier 3 words, so camouflage, up on our Canva slide. Then I would find a few visuals of camouflage. And then before I would teach the Tier 2 word, because I really want that last piece of information to be that Tier 2 before they dive into the text, I would say, I'm going to teach you some Tier 3 words. I don't even say Tier 3, just I'm going to teach you some words in the text that I don't need you to own. And then I would read the word for them. Camouflage. Repeat after me. Camouflage. Let me show you what camouflage looks like. Sometimes I even ask the students, I say, look at some of these pictures. What do you think the word camouflage means? And they may raise their hand. Oh, I see they're blending in. Absolutely. We're going to notice the turtle is going to camouflage or blend in with its surroundings. When we come to this word, it might be a little tricky. I'll remind you what that means. And that word would also then be on the anchor chart. And if they use that in their writing, great. They don't need to, but that is a word that they could go back into the text and find if they wanted to take their writing a step further.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Kirsten, is there anything else that you think is top of mind for teachers when they think about this explicit routine, Tier 2 words, teaching them?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is that I know this was an ELA lesson, and I know this is a literacy podcast, but the strategy really can be applied to any subject. I had a math teacher at my school that learned about this strategy with me, and she wanted to use it in her math class. It's really cool. It's just vocabulary's everywhere. It absolutely lives in every subject, all parts of the school day. And that's something I do want to share, that it can be used with all content and all curriculums and subjects.
Such a good point. Thank you.
It's a very important reminder. Thank you for bringing that up. It should be used in every content area for sure. Well, Kirsten, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today. I know our listeners are going to be really excited to try it in their classrooms. So thank you for your time and for everything you do.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me.